And we've assumed in watching people over the years, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of men and women from all over the world, different cultures, that it's the parent holding on. And it's true. The parents are gripping tight and they're not accommodating the transitional space that the adult child needs. But we've also learned that the golden boy or the golden girl inside the adult woman or man doesn't want to let go either. They don't want to live outside the special status. And they don't want to deal with the grief that I can't be both my own man and my mommy's golden boy. And the truth is, you can't be both.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. Today we are back with Dr. Greg Miller, our host, and Jim Farm, the clinical director here at Faithful and True. And Jim's going to have a special guest on the podcast today.
Absolutely. For those of you that regularly listen to our podcast, you know that we love having people from various fields come and be a part of what we're doing to just share their expertise. And so, Jim, why don't you tell us a little bit about the special guest that you're going to be interviewing?
Yeah, thanks, you guys. I'm really excited. I've been trying to get Ken Adams on this podcast for a while, and our schedules just haven't been able to connect. But Ken's got a private practice in Michigan, and he's one of the experts in the country actually around the concept of family enmeshment. And so we're going to talk a little bit about enmeshment, and then in particular, how does that apply to sexual addiction and recovery? He's a national trainer for those of us who have gone through the sexual addiction training for counselors, and so he's pretty well known and been around for quite a while. So I'm really looking forward to having him on the podcast.
Well, and thanks for making this possible. It's great to have Ken come as someone who is an expert in the field of sexual addiction.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Here now is Jim's conversation with Ken Adams.
All right. Well, hey, Ken, I'm glad that we're finally able to do this podcast. Appreciate you joining us. Just a little bit for our listeners. This is Ken Adams. He is one of the experts in the country around family enmeshment. He's written books, my favorite, Silently Seduced, and then I think the other books, When He's Married to Mom. And I think that actually you got a lot more books than that, don't you, Ken?
Well, I have one more co-edited book with Dr. Carnes, Clinical Manager of Sex Addiction. And then I have a new book coming out with a couple colleagues in February of next year, Light in the Dark, The Untold Legacy of Adult Children of Sex Addicts.
Wow.
So it's going to be the first book totally devoted to adult children of sexually addicted parents. So we're very excited about that. So it's cool.
Yeah, that sounds really good.
And ironically, so we define the roles in that book, and one of the roles is playing the surrogate husband or wife to the lonely spouse or partner, which that role includes an enmeshed dynamic, and we can get to the definition of that when you're ready. But
yeah, just for our listeners too, you were well acquainted with Mark, our founder. I think you wrote maybe a chapter in a book with him at some point as well, right?
I wrote a couple, 2 or 3 chapters with Mark, all on the same topic, looking at addiction in pastors, typically.
Okay. Well, great. Let's get at it.
Okay.
How would you define enmeshment?
So, yeah, enmeshment is a term used to describe family relationships. So this comes from the literature on family systems, family therapy, that kind of stuff. So they're in the business of looking at interactions and which interactions produce symptom packages in children and problems in family systems. So enmeshment is described as one end of the continuum of family involvement with each other. So one end is disengaged, emotionally disengaged. There's no warm fuzzies. Nobody's really in tune with each other. Nobody really is involved with each other. A lot of lonely souls, and so that's its own problem in our culture. But on the other end is the mesh dynamics, which I've looked at over many years and looked at it in the role of addiction. and so forth. And it describes family relationships which everybody's way too involved at the cost to a legitimate path of the unfolding of independence and autonomy with the adult children to have their own life, and for the family system to accommodate that transitional space so they can kind of plant their feet in their life and then be welcomed back into the family of origin. And that's a very Western cultural kind of value, right? You're kind of in our Western culture, you're assigned implicitly or explicitly to get your life kind of together romantically and so forth in your 20s and to kind of emancipate, right? And we could argue that, and I do get into some discussions that some other cultures, particularly collectivistic cultures, Asian culture, for example, as they sort of immigrate to Western cultures, there's a clash, right? And so what I would call enmeshment and refer to it in a pathological state, meaning it's causing problems, they might say, oh no, this is just normal. This is what we do, right? And if you dare get outside that system, we're going to excommunicate you. There's a sort of a separate conversation that I don't know if we want to spend a lot of time with, but there are certain systems, certain cultures in which enmeshment, getting in everybody's business and loyalty to the system is paramount, and don't you dare cross that loyalty. So in enmeshed dynamics, when they're in these disrupted or what we call pathological states, there's loyalty to the parents and the family at a cost to the individual's own journey. I get emails. I just read one just before we got online from a woman who said, "This is my husband." Right? I get multiple emails every single day from partners and spouses who say, "I never had a chance with this person because they're married to their mother or they're married to their family," meaning that they're so intertwined, and the family or the mother is the almost exclusive priority, that the spouse always gets second fiddle unless they can live with a certain amount of neglect and accommodate that system. So enmeshment in its sort of simplest form is too much closeness, too much involvement, too many demands for loyalty to the parental authoritative system. And then when it involves, say, mother and son, or father and daughter, or if the person happens to be of orientation of gay, so that would change the dynamic a bit. You have what I used to call covertly incestuous, where there's a feeling of, oh, this is too close. I'm not supposed to be your surrogate lover here, Mom. I can't listen to all your problems. And that sort of spins off a separate set of complications. So we have enmeshed dynamics, too much closeness, too much demand for loyalty at a cost to the individual journey and unfolding. And then layered in that, we can have a sort of surrogate husband or wife dynamic without overt sexual touch, but a set of inappropriate, what we might call incestuous dynamics, in which I'm married to my mother. So that's the title of my second book, When He's Married to Mom. Because if he's married to his mother, whoever is partnering with him is out of luck.
Yes.
They're going to get, so that's when it gets, so we get a lot of people coming into our program, overcomingenmeshment.com is our program. That's a primary driver, is that there's disruption in the romantic relationship. And so that's a primary symptom out of this enmeshment.
Okay, so when you're a child and you're experiencing this, you may not necessarily recognize it's happening, and so there may be a sense. My assumption is, as a child, sometimes there may be a sense of specialness, but also this kind of underlying resentment that's happening at the same time. Would that be true?
That's very true. Yeah, no, that's well put. I think you're right on. I think children who are in these roles of being leaned on for emotional support and given extra responsibility and elevated. So they move from the son is not supposed to be the king of the family, right? He
Yeah.
might get the prince role or she might get the princess role, but the king and queen have to stay the king and queen, right? And you're not supposed to win that position over as a kid. And when you do, you feel empowered. Your
Yeah.
mommy's special golden boy or your daddy's, sweet golden girl, and you begin to absorb a sense of power and dominance and inflation of self, but pretty soon it becomes a burden and there is a source of resentment and you're tethered to the parents. And then what happens invariably, and most often it happens to the children in the family whose temperaments are sensitive or
Mm.
they're empathic, so they tend to absorb the parental problems or the marital problems or mommy's problems or daddy's, and I take them on as my own. And don't worry, mommy, I won't leave you. But then he grows up, he's a teenager, and pretty soon mom's jealous of his girlfriend.
Mm.
Well, how'd this happen? Now they're fighting, and now she doesn't want him to go out on a date, or she's critical of the girlfriend. And pretty soon he manages to break off and marry somebody who he knows his parents are just out of rebellion, and they interfere perhaps in that marriage. And so over time, the golden boy or the golden girl begins to be worn out by the harness of extra responsibilities. That's the downside to this golden boy, golden girl status. We've watched in the workshops we've done over the years, we set these workshops up where people are kind of encased in them, and it gives them a sense of being able to feel free. And what would it be like not to experience this inappropriate guilt? So we're trying to give them a sense of that. And we've assumed in watching people over the years, and we've had hundreds and hundreds of men and women from all over the world, different cultures, that it's the parent holding on. And it's true. The parents are gripping tight and they're not accommodating the transitional space that the adult child needs. But we've also learned that the golden boy or the golden girl inside the adult woman or man doesn't want to let go either. They don't want to live outside the special status. And they don't want to deal with the grief that I can't be both my own man and my mommy's golden boy. And the truth is, you can't be both.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Interesting.
Yeah. And sometimes people will interpret that as, well, I have to amputate or disown my family. By no means. That is not emancipation. Emancipation is I become my own man and my own woman. I reintegrate myself into my family, and you accommodate that reintegration, mom and dad. You meet me on my terms, or you work with me in a spirit of collaboration and equalness. Now, some cultures, more collectivistic that they are, will find that difficult.
Mm. Mm. What happens to the if you're not the more sensitive sibling? How do the other siblings in the system? How does that impact them in an enmeshed system?
Well, they often become adversarial, sibling rivalry with the golden boy or golden status. So the golden boy almost then gets parentified as well, right? They take on a sort of empowered role in which the other siblings don't get. So there sometimes is a built-in jealousy through no fault of any of the siblings, right? The system sort of takes over, right? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts, which is one of the observations that the family therapist made over the years, is that the system will organize in a way to keep the system going. And so if the golden boy gets raised, say the firstborn boy or the firstborn girl, perhaps, golden boy, golden girl gets that special position with mom or dad, the other siblings will feel left out.
Mm-hmm.
And this sibling might even have a parentified role. So you'll see some conflict. And the other thing that happens is if this golden boy or golden girl does start to separate, the siblings will come to the assistance then of the parent and say, how dare you not talk to mom? So you'll get calls from the siblings and say, mom wants to talk with you. Why haven't you called mom lately?
Mm,
So the siblings in time also keep guard of the system.
I see.
And they'll become agents of the mother or the father who wants to keep that adult child who's a surrogate husband or wife entangled. So the siblings then will be part of the agents of the mother, or the act as the agents of the mother or father.
Okay. So some of the symptoms, if you will, if you want to describe it that as an enmeshed system is, like I've heard of, parents saying, well, there's no secrets, even when the kids marry, that new system, they don't have secrets, it's now you're part of our family rather than, you're creating a new family. And so there is no secrets between us. There's no
That's right.
privacy.
That's right. And I get complete access to the grandchildren as if they're mine, right? And your parental, so that go even a step further. Your parenting is secondary to my grandparenting. So that's when the parents can get really intrusive, which they cross boundaries and they become sort of in the center of that new family system. Again, if we look at other cultures, they would sort of spin that as that's just the way it is, right? And so and also I have met with a few Asian colleagues recently on this topic, who I was just wanting to hear more about the Asian culture. And they said that the other issue that happens when a culture comes into the Western culture, and there's a prejudice against it, or there's abuse or something, the culture even more rigidly locks down and demands even greater alliance because of the trauma associated with the hitting the prejudice of the Western culture. And you'll see that in some circling of the wagons.
Yeah.
So trauma in subcultures, we might even look at the African American culture for that matter. So it's trauma can cause this sort of locking down. Don't you dare live outside the system. You're loyal to the system. You're everybody else is second, right? So sometimes the trauma story plays a role there. Now I don't have a good answer about what you should do about that. I think that the family system, this is my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and these systems that are collectivistic will argue and say the opposite. But I think the system has an obligation to accommodate the adult child.
Yeah. Yeah.
That I think the last spiritual assignment for parents is to take the loss, to let that kid leave the nest,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah.
return by choice and reintegrate into the system. You're not going to lose him or her. You just get a more robust adult in your system. But I think systems that are rigid and where there's no secrets, where there's all loyalty is here, they feel very threatened by anybody who has independence outside the system.
Yeah.
And they're fragile in their identity formations, although they may look very rigid on the outside.
I've heard you say before this term that's always stuck with me, because you said the term, the freedom to choose and so forth. And I've heard you use this term in the past, Ken, obligatory guilt.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Yeah, so that's the currency of what gets exchanged. We might even call that obligatory love, which feels like guilt, right? So the currency in enmeshed systems is that they exchange obligatory love assignments. And obligatory love isn't bad, right? We're not going to throw that concept under the bus. I
Yeah.
mean, we all have relationships, we hope, that where there's a degree of obligatory love that keeps it moving, and you do that out of choice, and sometimes you want to and sometimes you don't. But in order to have relationships work, and there has to be a degree of obligatory love. But in the mesh systems, it becomes a sole currency. It's rigidly adhered to, and essentially it feels like obligatory guilt, that I must do this, that I have no choice. The guilt, when you talk to adults who are trying to navigate these two worlds, this sort of enmeshed family system, whether it's because of a culture collectivism or other reasons we'll call them other dysfunctional reasons. That implies that the collectivism is dysfunctional. I don't mean it that way, except that the collective system doesn't easily merge into Western culture. There is a dysfunction there. There is a conflict. But so when you listen to these adults who have one foot in their world and one foot in the family world, they feel torn. They're constantly feeling guilty. They try to placate everybody. They stretch themselves and extend themselves. And the person who loses, ironically, is them. They lose track of who they are, what they want, what's good for them. They're busy trying to give the needs to my family, my partner, my wife, my kids, my mother, my father, my siblings, my cousin. Nothing left for me. So these adults who are enmeshed with family systems, for whatever reasons, are torn.
Yeah.
Are torn.
Yeah.
And they live in this obligatory guilty space that you're talking about, which is constant. They make decisions they decide what job to get or what job to leave or what person to marry, or that's really where the dysfunction. One of the downsides that gets transmitted from an enmeshed system is my internal compass of how I choose who I want in my life, where I go, is now based on some guilty obligatory assignment that I must say yes when I mean no.
Mm. Mm. Yeah.
And so that becomes, it's not just the dysfunction in the family, it now has downloaded in the personality structure, in the sense of parts of self, which what I use to decide if I should be involved with you as a friend or a lover is out of guilt.
Yeah.
Well, that's not a good compass point. You're going to get
No.
yourself in a lot of trouble and a lot of disappointment and dissatisfaction if that's your compass point. So the way to break that is to say, no, not my job. I love you because I want to, not because I'm obligated to. It doesn't mean I don't show up when you're in trouble, mom, dad. You might need assistance. Sometimes I have to put my needs down. I'm happy to be there for you. And maybe sometimes I'm not happy to be there for you, but I'm willing to be there for you. But I'm my own person too. And first, and ironic, and most importantly, first of all, that's where the rub is.
Yeah.
In order to get out of that obligatory guilt, the belief system has to be challenged. Again, you get into these debates about collective systems that have collectivism in it, or systems that are first generation, or systems that have had trauma in the culture. They say, no, it doesn't matter. You be loyal to us.
Mm.
Circle the wagons.
And the system uses guilt to drive compliance, right? I think of an incident where mom was sad, so dad calls daughter and says, your mom's really sad. You need to talk to her. It's not she needs to talk to her. It's he needs, wants her to talk to her. But it's that guilt that mom's sad, so you need to talk with her.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a tool to kind of maintain that obligation or that enmeshment. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And you're saying something important here. You notice how the system members aligns and keeps the system going, right? And in some ways, I don't want to deal with mom, so don't you go too far, golden boy, because I see the burden she is, and I get to be separate from her as long as you're involved in taking care of her. So if you're going to go off and be an emancipate, I'm going to call you up and remind you not to go too far. And I'll make you feel guilty too if I can. So you're right. The system members will use obligatory guilt to leverage you back into that role of caretaking and surrogate husbandry or surrogate wife duties to the parent.
Yeah. Now, I would assume this creates a lot of problems then in our adult relationships. I'm really excited for this book that you have coming out, because my assumption is, as a married spouse, we do have needs. but if you didn't feel like you had a choice as a child to meet, needs which you weren't supposed to meet anyways. So when your spouse has legitimate needs, does that drive some resistance, some anger that's projected at the spouse that really is meant maybe for one of the parents?
Yeah, good observation. Glad you're bringing that up. Absolutely. So what you're describing is, so let's just kind of grow this child up into adulthood who's been under this obligatory guilty assignment to caretake and absorb the parents' problems, right? And so your needs become my needs. I have no distinction. So I really don't have much of a self. So I marry somebody or I get involved with somebody and they have some needs. And you're right. You experience that as, whoa, enmeshing, suffocating, engulfing, smothering. Those are the words we hear. And they begin to get ambivalent. So enmeshed adults often have ambivalent attachment styles. 1 foot in and 1 foot out. I'm not going to give you all of me because my life's been sucked out of me over here. You're only going to get part of me. So then you get a conflict. Then the partner or spouse says, wait a minute, you're not with me all the time. You're busy making vacation plans with your family, but you don't bring me into the conversation. Or I want more time with you. And pretty soon the anger gets projected over here that you don't dare have at your parent. So you're right. We call that projection or displacement onto the spouse, feelings of being smothered or engulfed, and then angry over don't you dare. And the other thing that spins off from this that you and I both know, working with sex addiction and porn addiction and behaviors, compulsive behaviors sexually, is now I'm going to look for an out. I'm going to look for an exit. Now I'm trapped by my family. I feel trapped by my spouse. I got no place to go where I feel free. So I'm going to turn to porn, or I'm going to turn to a sex worker or an affair where I'm not under any love obligation. Now I'm free. So this sex addiction, I don't mean that literally. I mean that it's a false promise that I can now act out sexually. We call it acting out sexually.
Yeah.
Or escape in porn or behaviors sexually that pull me away from obligatory assignment. And then it gets really compulsive because, boy, this feels good. I don't have to, I'm not emotionally obligated to anybody. The other thing we can see in this sort of escape exiting is eating, right? I can eat what I want. I'll do. So there's some part of that adult child that when they face feeling trapped in the relationship with the spouse and feeling conflict, nobody understands me, you won't give me any room, they're not identifying that it has to do with their family. Pretty soon you're looking for an escape. Food and sex are the primary escape routes.
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, because you have access to them, and they give it. So there's a sense I can eat. I had a guy say to me one time, a man say to me, a client say to me one time, I decided at an early age, she being the mother controlled him, but she's not going to control my eating. I'll eat what the hell I want to eat.
Yes.
So it became a protest, but unfortunately, it caused him a lot of health issues. And so so sex and food are sort of always available internally. They're kind of the internal drugstore, so to speak, versus having to get hooked on alcohol or drugs. I mean, that too can play that role, but we tend to see more sex and food because of the sort of normative, accessible parts of our being are involved in those two aspects.
Yeah. So is that kind of, for someone that does struggle with sexual addiction, did they at some point in their adolescence or childhood recognize, hey, this is the place where I have my independence or my privacy or my place where I'm not obligated, and
I think so. I think there is I don't know if it's always conscious.
Okay.
But there is a certain moment, or we call it a catalytic moment, where I feel this sense of freedom that really sort of charges me and sort of redirects my path sexually. So now I'm going to pursue that those experiences where I feel free, even though ironically, the more compulsive I am, the less freedom I have.
Mhm. I've heard you say before that, sex addicts often recreate the neurochemistry of their youth in terms of they have this enmeshment, and I want you to talk a little bit about this, that sometimes the enmeshment recovery contradicts the sexual addiction recovery, because oftentimes the sex addiction will create this lack of privacy then, once discovery is made.
Excuse me. Yeah. So that's something that's becoming clearer to me, and I'm beginning to see as we work with more cases, kind of how best to handle that. But what you're describing is that when there's a betrayal, sexual betrayal in a relationship, which is implicit or explicit contracts of fidelity, like a marriage, for example, one
Mhm.
that's we expect you to be faithful in. So whether that's explicit or implicit, when there's a betrayal of that trust, then the spouse or partner is thrown into a acute traumatic response. Then they get their own set of symptoms through no fault of their own. And then there's a path of recovery for the couple that requires the spouse or partner to say, hey, what have you been doing all day? You didn't call me, right? There's a
Mhm.
need to sort of move into the privacy of the recovering addict so that I can be secure that you're not off, acting in your addiction. So if we just take that path, there's conflict about what should be shared, how much should be shared, what role, or how often should a spouse or does a spouse need to be asked for privacy. So there's an ongoing discussion about um, how to check in on that, the frequency of that, what's the best way to do a disclosure of sexual secrets. So there's a whole field of discussion, as you know, clinically about how to handle that. And then
Mhm.
how to keep that from the spouse becoming the police, right? So, there's an obvious need for sharing in the early parts of recovery as a couple. The
Mhm.
addict has to do the heavy lifting, checking in, letting the spouse know about their recovery. But if that doesn't change, if there's no trust that develops, then the couple can get into a rigid lockdown pattern in which the one adult becomes the police,
Mhm.
policing the recovering addict. And then that person feels like the controlling parent to the man. So if this man also has an enmeshment story,
Yeah.
now we really have trouble, because if the spouse says, I don't care, I got to know what you're doing day and night, I want complete access to everything, in spite of the fact that you've been in recovery for 5 years. Intellectually, I know you're not acting out, but I got to have access. Now she feels like mommy. And
Mhm.
so this man has a boy in him who was once controlled by his mother.
And it might
His
have
rec-
it might have driven the origination of the addiction, right?
exactly, provoking his spouse to become like his mother.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so now his job is to have his own voice, both with his mother and family, and his wife. So there's a clash.
Mhm.
There's a clash between enmeshment recovery. The recovering individual needs his own voice, and not everything is secrecy. Some things are privacy. I don't want to share every time I notice somebody is attractive. I'm not sure that's my addiction. It may just be my biology. But if my biology is always going to be under scrutiny, we're in trouble here.
Mhm. Mhm.
Now, I have other agreements with you, spouse or partner, in which, yes, this is what I don't do, and you can have access to asking me about that. But so the enmeshment recovery ultimately leads to I need my own voice.
Mhm.
In its most um, regress state, the recovery from the addiction in the coupleship can lead to a parental role, as I mentioned, and now you have a clash.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we noticed, we notice sometimes, is that in the couple's recovery from enmeshment, if the man winds up sneaking around and contacting his mother on the side and not involving the spouse and say, you know what, I'm going to call my family this weekend. I want you to know I got this. You don't need to worry. I'm going to check in with you after. My decision. I'm the adult in my life, but I don't need your permission. You're not going to police this. But I also understand that I'm lovingly obligated to keep you in the loop. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
If that recovering sex addict, also recovering from enmeshment, doesn't bring the partner in, but sneaks a call off or sends a gift to his mother, it feels like the betrayal of the sex addiction to the wife.
Mm-hmm.
So we've got to ask the recovering enmeshed man not to sneak around as a solution to this any more than he would with his sex addiction.
Yeah. Yeah.
He has to say, look, I'm going to contact my parents this weekend. I'm going to have a short call. I want to see how they're doing. I'm in my adult. I'll check in with you later.
That's good.
But you are not my permission. You're not my policewoman here. I don't need your permission to do that. Now, the trouble is, if the wife or partner has not seen evidence of recovery, she's going to have a hard time trusting that.
Yeah. It's going to create a lot of
So there
anxiety.
has to be some evidence of recovery that the individual can handle his family.
Okay.
And that he'll check in after. Look, I had a nice call. They asked how you were doing. I kept my boundaries. I didn't make any promises. We're good. Okay. All right. That's how we do this. So that's the formula for moving forward for the couple. The trouble is if the partner is burdened with betrayal, she may have little capacity to tolerate any independence on part of the recovering addict. And that gets to be, because she feels threatened by that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you're out there being independent with your family, what's going to stop you from picking up the phone and calling an affair partner, right? So all of a sudden, autonomy and independence, even in its normative state, could feel threatening to a betrayed partner. She has some difficult decisions and some sorting to do on that.
Yeah.
Because functioning role of the police, meaning monitoring you, is not in anybody's best interest.
No, because I'm assuming it creates just massive amounts of anxiety for her to have to police him.
And there's no stopping. There's no amount of policing that stops an addict from acting out if they're going to act out.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for
And
saying.
what it is, the policing is safety seeking. So the more the recovering addict and the enmeshed man, in this case heterosexual man, woman being the betrayed partner, the more he can offer transparency without feeling like it's submission to mommy, the more safety she could feel.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is the same formula with recovering from sex addiction. Transparency can breed a sense of safety. So transparency is the best solution for the recovering enmeshed man as well.
Okay. I know this is probably your experience too, Ken, but my experience is if I notice someone that probably has some significant enmeshment, and they're not aware of it, I usually become the object of their frustration. They get very defensive and angry with that you would even suggest it. And is that because of the continual loyalty to the parent?
Exactly, right. Well, it's what you're confronting them with is the bind that they feel.
Yeah.
That they feel trapped, and they feel stuck in trying to live in two worlds. And when you confront the issue of enmeshment with the client, it penetrates that world temporarily, and it feels what it feels like to the enmeshed individual is you're saying to them you need to choose. And so you want to be mindful of that when you bring it up, because they what you mean by your questioning is different than how they're interpreting it.
Mm-hmm.
They're feeling like you're asking me to amputate my family.
Mm-hmm.
You're asking me, to do something I can't do. And
Yeah.
so it's better to move in and when you notice somebody with enmeshment issues, dynamics, and say, tell me about how that felt to be over at your family's the other day, and for them to criticize your wife in front of you. What was that like for you? And so you want to hold space for them. You want to align with what bind they feel. And if you can build on that rapport with them, you must really be a bind for you. You must have wanted to protect your wife, but you didn't dare confront your mother.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? So you want to start to build on your empathy for their bind, and when you get a solid connection there, then you might move into labeling.
Okay.
And I wonder if we can take a deeper look at that
Yeah.
and see if there's a way for you to align yourself to yourself and your wife and still have a relationship with your parent. Oh yeah, what's that mean? So then if they can begin to ask questions, now you might direct them to material like my books, or I have stuff on the overcomingenmeshment.com website, they can look at, or you could play right in session, short
Yeah.
little clips, videos. So, remember that when you bring it up, you penetrate that world in which they feel there's no freedom to move, and what they hear is you're wanting to want them to amputate their mother or father. Remember, their first loyalty is theirs. So you've got to tread lightly, hold space, be mindful of that denial, and that their belief system is really organized around loyalty to the system.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so when you say the word enmeshment,
Yeah.
they're feeling confronted in their belief system,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I frankly think they need to be.
Mm-hmm.
But you want to move into that as carefully as you can. And certainly doing something like this, a podcast where somebody can sit back, listen in, and kind of filter in and out the information from me and you
Mm-hmm.
at their leisure, and
Yeah.
sort of sit with it and figure out what they're going to do with it.
So I got a question in regards to, is enmeshment possible with the same sex parent? Daughter, mom, father, son.
Absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes we'll see it. You will see it. It seems to be rampant in the culture these days, but we see it more under the guise of the extension of a narcissistic desire for my kid to be what I want him or her to be. So you'll see this parent, this hovering sort of, these parents who beat up the umpire at the baseball game or the soccer game because they called their kid out or something, right? That there's this narcissistic extension that my kid is me, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a similar dynamic that we see, and we can see that with fathers and sons, particularly in sports, for example. The classic enmeshment dynamic and we see that with sons and fathers, and if there's a family business, we can see that. We can see some of that, with fathers and sons, if the father's gripping too tight as the son's moving into his world, and maybe he's his hunting buddy and he doesn't want. So there could be some of that. We more typically see it with daughters and mothers, where the daughter becomes the best friend to the mother in place of the father who's absent.
Mm-hmm.
So she might not lean on the son, so the daughter doesn't become the surrogate husband per se. There's elements of that, but she becomes enmeshed. So we have some frequency of daughters with mothers more than we do sons and sons and fathers in this classic enmeshed dynamic. We often see food disorders with women, more sexual disorders with men enmeshed. But again, I don't want to overgeneralize. We see them both. Sometimes the mother and the daughter will align against the father. If the father is a brute, is an alcoholic, maybe he's violent or abusive, the daughter will be angry with the father too, or feel traumatized by the father, but she might also absorb the mother's hatred or anger at the father. And pretty soon the daughter has her own feelings, but also now has her mother's feelings, and
Mm,
really has a hard time in romantic relationships because now she's angry and she doesn't trust.
mm. And that's where the
And she has
projection
her,
happens into her husband,
yes,
possibly.
yeah,
Yeah.
and she has her own story and she's absorbed her mother's anger as well.
Yeah. Well, I know we're almost running out of time, but I want to kind of get into, I know you've talked about like the stages of how do I move out of enmeshment. And I know you've talked about separation, differentiation, and then finally emancipation. Could you talk just a little bit about that, what that looks like going through those kind of stages?
Yeah, so we can, yeah, so again, we're going to set aside the collectivism of cultures and their conflict with the Western culture. We're just going to say that in Western culture, there needs to be a degree of autonomy and independence to make it. And it is what it is. So we'll just say it what it is, and we'll save for another time how to manage the clash between other cultures and the Western culture, what's pathological, what's not. Setting that aside for a moment. So the movement is, I need some separateness. So I can't call you every day. I'm not going to listen to you complain about dad, about your sexual problems with dad. I'm done doing that. So separation, right? Some boundaries. That may mean topics of conversation, or maybe you stop taking money or giving money to the family. Look, and I don't need to take money from you. I need to make my own. Um, it might mean topics of conversation. I mentioned that. It might mean time. It could even mean a move out of the vicinity. I need my
Mhm.
own geographic space. Although geography, a geography separation is not emancipation. So you can move away to the other side of the country here in the States, away from your enmeshed family or enmeshed parent, and you could still feel emotionally tethered to them every day.
Mm, mm,
So separation, there needs to be some separateness. To get my own sea legs, I got to have some time on my own to think for myself. I can't be bombarded with your problems every day, Mom. But then there needs to be what we call differentiation. Okay, I'm me and you're you. Your problems are your problems. I might want to help you with them. I might choose to, but they're not my problems. You have your own higher power. I'm not it.
yeah.
So my needs are not my needs. Your feelings are not my feelings. I'm differentiated from you. Myself is different from you.
Yeah.
And then the final phase, emancipation, which is kind of the outcome of this, is, you know what? I'm my own man now. Your problems, Mom, with dad, are no longer a threat to me. I had an email from a man the other day who had come to our level 1 workshop for enmeshment. And he said, I can't thank you enough. He goes, not only can I be around my mother and not feel an iota of responsibility and still care about her, but I'm also enjoying her. And
Wow.
I was like, wow, there you go. There
Yeah.
you go. So that's emancipation. I can sit with you and I can love you because I'm not burdened with merging with you. I'm differentiated from you.
Yeah. Yeah. I,
So
I,
those
I
are the broad three phases that have a lot of work to do in all those phases.
yeah. I've heard you say before, emancipation is not negotiable.
Yeah, and so so you don't so again we're going to set aside the collectivism of other cultures, but I get these questions all the time. Should I invite my mother or father into family therapy and talk to this about them? Well, you could, but what often happens if say the enmeshed son with the mother invites the mother into family therapy session, it winds up feeling like a marital session, and then he relapses in his sex addiction 2 days later. So it's you don't need your parents' agreement to be your own person.
Yeah.
You're spiritually obligated to unfold who you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think that's a Western cultural phenomenon, but that's me. And so it would be nice to have their blessing. I love you, sweetheart. Please visit. We like seeing you. And by the way, I would like to see you to visit too. When's a good time? So you'd like your parents' blessing, but you don't need their agreement to emancipate.
Yeah, yeah, that's really good. We work with a lot of Christian clients here, and so one of the things I'll hear, is, well, my parents, and these are adult kids. My parents say I need to obey them, coming from the Bible. Children, obey your parents. And Mark used to say, when he was around, he used to say, that's when you're a child, but when you're an adult, honoring your parents involves being truthful and being honest,
Yes. And doesn't the Bible also say something about leaving your parents?
Yes, it does. It does.
So I think when you get the Bible quotes, it's really about denial. I don't want to deal with this, and it feels too complicated. So I'm going to oversimplify it. Just pull up a scripture, because
Yeah,
you can also pull up the scripture that says you should be separate from your parents. I forget how it goes, but you know what I'm talking about.
yeah, yeah,
Leaving your parents. So I think it's really about avoidance. And
yeah,
so you can still love your parents, be respectful.
yeah. Well, I think
Nobody's advising not to do that.
well, I think those passages are oftentimes used to drive that obligatory guilt that we talked about earlier. You
Yeah.
know.
Well, listen, it's been great. It's been great having you, being with you, and I'm glad you're doing this, because I think this stuff is helpful. And if you don't mind, I'll mention once again my website, if that's okay.
Yes, yes, for sure.
But if your listeners want to learn more about enmeshment, I have a number of free um, downloads of videos on my website. We do a monthly free webinar for the public. My facilitators and I do different topics related to enmeshment. That website is you can get to is overcomingenmeshment.com. There's also stuff in there about workshops and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I know I've referred guys to your Overcoming Enmeshment workshop, and lots of good things about that for sure. And so I appreciate you joining us, Ken. And
You're welcome.
as always, I met you a little bit after Mark passed away, and it was kind of good timing just to get to know you and have another mentor come into my life. So I just really
Yeah.
want to thank you for that.
It's You're welcome. It's nice to stay connected to Mark through you. That's a nice connection for us.
Yeah. All right. Thanks,
All right.
Ken.
All right, you're welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Jim, for that conversation with Ken Adams. I'm sure that our listeners and our viewers were very intrigued and benefited greatly from that conversation. For those of you out there, we want to thank you again for joining us on the Faithful and True podcast. And we hope that this coming week for you will be a week that's filled with many blessings and great vision.